So today's gospel passage is that famous Doubting Thomas passage. Poor Thomas. His claim to fame is his doubt. He says that he needs to see and touch Jesus in order to believe. That seems pretty rational, doesn't it? But poor Doubting Thomas, what a name he has been stuck with. We know names can be kind of good or bad. My great auntie, Aunt Ping, was called that forever because her younger siblings couldn't say Anne Marie, so when they called her Ping, she was Ping forever. But Doubting Thomas, who brought Christianity to India, who even has a Gnostic gospel attributed to him, nope, he's none of those things. He's Doubting Thomas, based on that afternoon. Stories around the resurrection and the risen Christ are a little wild, aren't they? On that first Easter morning, resurrected Jesus called Mary Magdalene by name in the garden. She'd been talking to him and assuming he was the gardener, but when she heard her name, she knew it was Jesus. Our names are that important. I've heard that story and Thomas's story many, many times and preached on it many times too. But something new struck me this year. Jesus tells Mary, "You can't touch me." What do I know? But I assume she wanted to hug Jesus when she saw him, to touch him. I think that's probably what most of us would want to do when seeing a loved one that we thought was dead. "Don't touch me," he tells her, and then he continues to say something about he's going to the Father, and okay, there's more to that story. This command, though, not to touch him, is so strong that we have even used a Latin phrase to summarize this scene. Noli me tangere. Paintings are called that, like this famous one by Titian. There it is. And in this painting, Jesus was originally wearing a hat until the painter Titian decided to paint over it. So I'm guessing that the hat was how Mary thought he was the gardener. But I want you to let me know if any of your gardening togs look like what Jesus is wearing. Please let me know. I'm guessing that it's the hoe that he has in his hand that was, most convincing that he was the gardener. I never really liked the story, that part of the story, a whole lot. For crying out loud, if Jesus can resurrect, I think he can handle a hug from Mary, right? I've always thought that. So this "don't get attached to me in my physical presence," okay, I get it, but it never really set well with me. Seems like a really strange boundary to have after a resurrection. But then we have the story of Thomas, who is out and about and misses the appearance of the risen Christ. And the story in some ways seems like a little payback for the women, in a way. After all, they tell the guys about the risen Christ, and they just don't believe them and say, "Well, what you're saying to us is idle talk." So when Jesus appears and the men can't wait to tell Thomas what has happened, and then they get a dose of their own medicine from Thomas. Thomas doesn't believe them. He wants proof, just like I'm sure they did. And he says his proof is being able to put his hand in Jesus' wound at the hole in his side. And lo and behold, not only does Jesus appear again, but he lets Thomas do just that. So Mary hears, "Don't touch me." And Thomas gets a, "Come here, don't just touch me, but put your whole hand in my side." Doesn't really seem fair, does it? This all seems kind of cattywampus to me. Mary Magdalene is the first to see the risen Christ, so we know there's baggage with a woman or women being the first to see him, and that is a whole other sermon, because today is Thomas's day. So, again, poor Thomas, his claim to fame is his doubt. He says that he needs to see and touch Jesus in order to believe. So, seeing is believing for Thomas. In fact, there are many post-resurrection stories where the disciples see Jesus, but they don't recognize him, like on the beach, the story I just told the kids. So we wonder, is seeing believing, really? Jesus appears to Thomas a week after he visited the disciples. He appears to Thomas so he too can believe. Jesus says, "Have you believed because you've seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." And that's pretty much the category that all of us fall into. Those who have not seen the physical Jesus with our eyes, as did the first followers, but those who believe without seeing. There's a lot that we believe without actually seeing. Putting news and politics aside, think of like test results from our doctors, for example. We can't see a lot of what they report on, but we usually believe the results. And remember the olden times before even Skype or Zoom or FaceTime, when we talked on the phone and didn't see the person on the other end? But when we talked to them, there was enough information to assume that we were talking to the person we thought we were talking to. We don't usually see gas going into our car, but we see dollars whiz by in the pump. We see our tank register is full, the car runs, so we believe the tank is full. Or when we charge our electric vehicles or devices, we can't actually see the charge happening, but we believe those little charging symbols that it is happening. So perhaps believing isn't as difficult as we make it out to be. Perhaps it's not as mysterious as we might think. We know the end of our story today. The disciples were locked in a room because of fear. They had just experienced the disturbing and agonizing events of Jesus' last days. They must have been contemplating what was next. Going back to fishing, collecting taxes. Jesus' death was deeply disturbing. It left them with choices to make. Things were over. They weren't as they thought. Jesus was gone. Perhaps it was time to go back to their old lives. And then came this news of Jesus' resurrection, the empty tomb. What did they make of that news? He lives again? What did that mean for them? What should they do? Was their ministry perhaps not over? Not yet? We know the story. We know their ministry was not over. It was beginning anew. In fact, their ministry was passed down to us. Jesus soothed their fears with peace, but then sent them out into the world, out of the locked doors and into the world. As the Father has sent me, so I send you. Jesus calls them out of fear into something even bigger. The insecurities of life, resurrection life, new life. Their fears didn't get them off the hook, and neither did Thomas's doubt. Still they were loved, still they were called, still they were sent out in Jesus' name. Maybe we are slow to see him. No worry, we're not alone in that. Maybe we doubt him when we see him. Not to worry there either. Just remember Thomas. It's kind of ironic that Thomas gets this unflattering doubting Thomas reputation, like he's some sort of slacker. Yet the reason why he missed Jesus' initial appearance to the disciples was because he wasn't in the room, the locked room. He was brave enough to go out, to be out. Jesus' followers were huddled, sheltering in place, hiding because they were afraid of what would come next. Certainly after Jesus' death, this wasn't an unfounded fear, but Thomas had gone out. He was the only one. What was he doing? We don't know. Was he kicked out? Did they kick him out? Maybe he was out finding food. Remember, there was no delivery back then. Maybe he was getting some air and space away from all of that togetherness with his anxious friends. Maybe he was checking on family or friends. We just know he was out. He was not in the locked room. That took some courage, I imagine. Bill and I were lucky enough to visit the newly reopened Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris on our recent trip on the Friday before Palm Sunday. And here's a goofy selfie slide for you. because you need to see that, I'm sure. So, and you see the next slide, it was pretty incredible to see the church, the restoration of which could be likened to a resurrection. It was magnificent, inside and out. And we were amazed to see the very old choir enclosures, and that's the next slide. They were wooden sculptures from the 13th century telling the life of Jesus. It seems like a miracle that they survived the destructive fire in 2019 that happened on the Monday of Holy Week. Somehow, these wooden carving screens from the 13th century survived that terrible blaze. We were very struck by the Doubting Thomas scene, and that's the one you see here. It's also on the cover of your bulletin. Not so much Thomas reaching out to touch Jesus' side, but the disciples that were huddled away and fearful. They were depicted as tucked away in these boxy enclosures on the side with only their heads and their wide eyes visible. You can see that. There they are. Look at them. And this seemed to me like a really true-to-life depiction of what fear does to us, isn't it? We get all stuck up in our heads, we disconnect from our terrified bodies, and we fight, flight, or freeze. And our dear friends look pretty frozen there, don't they? I'm amused because I recognize this response in myself, in churches, in any group of humans, really. But somehow we know the story of Jesus today, and that's a miracle that we know this story when you see our friends hiding in boxes. God can work with our slow hearts, our doubts, our fears. The good news is God's love and mercy is bigger than these slow hearts, doubts, and fears. Our God is the resurrection God, the God of new life and new beginnings. Perhaps our doubts present us with a seed for new growth. What will grow out of our fears? If we really look at our doubts and wrestle with them, what will emerge from the encounter? What will we learn? What could we get curious about? Like many of Jesus' early followers, we recognize Jesus in food. It's powerful. Breakfast on the beach, in communion. The disciples recognized Jesus in the breaking of the bread. And just yesterday at Ann Chatterton's memorial service, we remembered how Ann challenged our church to up our coffee hour game. She was a proponent of chairs and tables so that folks could linger and sit and chat for food for children, not just adult snacks. What a gift that was to us. We love our coffee hour, right? It's our very important third sacrament after communion and baptism, the sacrament of snack, right? Full of powerful and transformational grace and love. Where do we see Jesus? Where do we experience him as a resurrected Christ? Maybe, indeed, we are slow to see him. We're not alone in that. We are in good company. It seems that what ties all the stories of Jesus' post-resurrection appearances together is that no one recognizes him at first. Don't we too doubt him when we see him? But God comes to us through our doubts and fears. Just as Jesus went through a locked door to Thomas to give him what he needed for his faith journey, so Jesus goes again and again to us. No scolding, no judgment, no scorn, only his peace. Thomas is actually a really good role model for our spiritual journey. Like I said, he left the room. He faced some fears. And he also was quite clear with Jesus what he needed. He needed to see and touch Christ's wounds, and he said so. Granted, he didn't say it to Jesus directly. He said it to his friends, maybe just with a little bit of bluster, but Jesus seemed to know what Thomas demanded and offered Thomas what he needed when he appeared. And that's a comforting thought, isn't it? God hearing our need and offering us what we need for our spirits to be supported. It's interesting that when we talk about this whole encounter, we call it the Doubting Thomas story. In a way, we seem to have our eyes on the wrong guy, though. We don't call it the story about the God who appears to us and gives us what we need for our faith, even if it means sticking our fingers in his wounds. It's a long title, but it would be pretty good, I think. This painting by the artist Caravaggio in 1602 is striking. Probably seen this before. It's a famous painting. The shadow of Thomas's doubt makes this painting quite dark until you come to the heads of Christ and Thomas. Look at that. The way Jesus holds Thomas's hand and guides him to touch the wound in his side is amazing, and it brings divine light to the painting and to Thomas. Can we imagine a God who is eager to give us what we need for our journey through life? A God who is ready to meet us and guide us. The name given to this painting is the incredulity of Thomas. Incredulous Thomas. That's such a better name than doubting Thomas. In this Easter season, it's about Jesus, isn't it? The Jesus who lives on after the crucifixion, after the resurrection, the Jesus who lives in you and me and in us as the living body of Christ. It's easy enough to get fixated on the wrong things, isn't it? So easy to lose perspective in life, to lose our focus on what really matters. May we focus on the wonder of the God who comes to meet us in the garden, on the shore, in breakfast, wherever we need God to be. Jesus said, "Have you believed because you've seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the child of God, and through believing you may have life in his name. May it be so. Amen.